Hey guys, so I got a message today about head scissors and choking and breath play and that type of thing. And the person was concerned about somebody going too far and what does that look like and what are the risks that are involved with that. And I think I've done a video on breath play and choking and all that type of things and the safety risks that are associated with that before, but it's probably a good idea to kind of revisit that a little bit. So, just as a quick reminder, I was certified as an EMT first responder, EMT basic. It's kind of pretty close to the same level there when I was in high school back in 2003. Okay, I am currently a personal trainer. I do have to maintain a basic first aid CPR certification as part of that. I do have a little bit of extra knowledge about how the body works and all that, but to be completely honest with you guys, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an RN, I'm not somebody that you would want to go to for any type of physical examination or to be really looking to as an expert when it comes to these types of things. So with that knowledge, here are my thoughts, here are my opinions on that. But so what you should understand, first of all, is that choking is not necessarily 100%, the horrible thing that a lot of people think that it is. We in jiu-jitsu, we get choked sometimes multiple times during a week, sometimes multiple times during a day. We don't necessarily pass out from it, but we do practice chokes all the time. People go into tournaments, they do pass out. People pass out in class. We were working out in Maine, and Jet was training with a partner who wasn't tapping when we were practicing triangle chokes, and the guy he was partnered with was just not tapping, and the coach was there and telling Jet how to adjust and correct the choke, and then eventually the person went out. And even so, when we were over in Maine, I ended up rolling with Jet, and he passed out in one of my triangle chokes. I've been choked, probably 100 times. So it's one of those things that it's a commonplace in judo, it's commonplace in Brazilian jiu-jitsu for people to get choked. People do it for sexual reasons all the time. People do pass out all the time. That being said, it's not without risk. Okay, so to kind of go over what those risks are, first of all, is that what you're doing when you are doing a blood choke on somebody, and I'm talking about blood choke, not a smothering, not a crushing of the windpipe. When you crush the windpipe, what can actually happen is you actually literally can damage the structures in there, and you can actually make it so that a person can't breathe on their own, that you would actually have to, put an artificial airway in or something like that to keep those structures open so that somebody could continue to breathe. So, besides the fact that you could also trigger other reflexes when you crush the windpipe and all that. So when we are talking about choking, we're probably really talking about blood chokes where we are restricting the blood flow up to the brain. And so when you restrict the blood flow up to the brain, if you reach a certain level, the person will pass out. What's happening is that the immediate thing that's happening is that the brain is not getting oxygen. And that lack of oxygen can trigger the brain to trigger other parts of your body, such as your lungs and such as your heart, to start to work harder. And when you trigger your heart to work harder, especially in a panicked sense, you can trigger mitochondrial fibrillation, basically cardiac arrest, which is not the same thing as a heart attack. Okay, a heart attack is when a vein or artery, either in the blood or in the heart or somewhere else in the body, is actually restricting blood flow to the point that damage actually occurs to the organ, specifically the heart in this case. Congestive heart failure is when the heart can no longer overcome those external forces to pump blood throughout the body, versus cardiac arrest, which is basically you have two electrical nodes within your heart that send a signal diagonally through your heart that triggers it to contract. When you start to have kind of a panicked response, maybe it's because you've got a blood clot somewhere, so maybe it could be just a issue with those electronic nodes in your heart. They can send a erratic signal through the heart that causes what's called fibrillation, which is where the heart basically spasms. And so one of the things is that when you see somebody on TV using the paddles or using some kind of automated defibrillator, and they're trying to start the heart, that's not actually what's happening there. A defibrillator actually stops the heart, because what's happening is the heart's going, and so you're basically slapping it so it goes, oh, hi, what was I supposed to do? Oh yeah, pump normally, right? So when you choke somebody and the brain is deprived of oxygen, it can send that panic signal to the heart, which can trigger that fibrillation, okay? Now, we are living in 2020, 2021, and the other thing that is a inherent risk of choking somebody is going to be a stroke, right? So, you know, I've heard somebody at one point in time mention the possibility that, you know, when you compress the arteries, they may not open back up again. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that you actually, you know, there's enough blood pressure there that it should open up again. The only times that I've really heard of collapsed veins, collapsed arteries, and it's usually actually is a vein, not an artery, is from needle use. I could be wrong on that as far as vein or artery, because I don't do drugs. So, but you poke into a artery so many times, eventually it can collapse. But when we're talking about compressing, I don't really believe that that's something that could happen. But especially when we're talking about COVID-19 in 2020, 2021, it can really, really thicken your blood, and it could cause blood clots. And so when you compress those arteries shut, you're actually building up blood behind that could start to clot, and it could cause a stroke. And that could be fatal, and there's not going to be a whole lot that you can do right there in the moment to be like, oh, fuck, this is a stroke that we're experiencing right now. It's not a mitochondrial issue. And so, you know, they may not know until they get to the hospital, and that might be too late, that, oh, this is actually a major stroke that we've triggered. So that is definitely an inherent risk, especially if you have had or currently have COVID. And as we know now, not all COVID conditions will have external symptoms. So your blood clotting might be the only symptom that you have. So, you know, there is now an inherent risk that wasn't there a year ago. So going further into this, other things that could be triggered by it, and I think I've talked about this a little bit before in the past. When you get choked, one of the things that you could have present is is what's called a petechia. A petechia is basically where the capillaries somewhere have exploded. Basically, they've opened up, and then you'll get this like red dotting, usually like around your eyes if you've been choked. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like, you know, when people are like, okay, we're gonna do, you know, half as much pressure as what would normally make somebody pass out, and just hold it for longer, because we want the choke to be a slow choke out or whatever. What that does is it actually closes off the venous blood from leaving the head, but does not necessarily stop the blood from going into the head. And so what's going to happen is that your heart is continually pushing more and more blood into the skull. That's increasing the blood pressure in there, and then you start to get these petechia. Well, the reason why I bring this up is because, honestly, a petechia itself is pretty mundane. It's not going to hurt you. It's just going to look like you haven't had sleep for a while, or you got some extra freckles. But what we do have to be concerned about is an aneurysm, right? So basically the blood pressure is raising in the skull, and it's putting strain on the veins and arteries and capillaries within the skull, causing them to balloon out. And if that could rupture, or it could become a area where there could become a clot in the further in the future, you might end up with a stroke. You might end up with a ruptured aneurysm that could be fatal. So that is another risk that comes with choking. Now, this was specifically a question about choking or head scissors specifically, which I should actually even mention that the amount of pressure that builds up in the head is going to be contingent on not just how much pressure is being exerted, but over the surface area that pressure is being exerted, right? So if I were to take my thumb and put it onto an artery, the blood pressure on inside my skull is not going to increase all that much compared to a thigh. I'm going to be pushing the blood here up and down at the same time, which could increase the blood pressure in the head, coming back to that aneurysm risk. So when we're talking about head scissors, really, really strong head scissors specifically on the neck, you could separate the vertebrae. I've never heard of that happening outside of movies, and even to go into neck injuries, broken necks and whatnot. I think I've actually broken my neck at one point in time. Buster Keaton was very well known for basically breaking his neck in every single film he ever made. It's not like in the movies where, you break your neck and you're suddenly paralyzed or you are, you just die. But, that is certainly still a possibility, but you could end up with headaches, you can end up with limited range of motion, and then you're also at a higher risk for those injuries that could lead to paralysis. And generally speaking, I think that pretty much every wrestler that's been at the game long enough will have a neck fracture or a neck injury at some point in time, and head scissors could definitely exacerbate that if there's already one present, or it could create one. So you have to be very careful with what kind of movement you're doing while you're doing head scissors. So basically, what I'm saying is that if you're really squeezing and then you shift hard, you could separate vertebrae, you could actually break the bones in there. So you have to be really, really careful with that as well. Going into, the first, like I said, you could displace more blood, which could lead to this higher risk of stroke, higher risk of petechia and aneurysms. But what we also want to be thinking about is that we're now adding an element of breath control. So, like I said, when we are choking somebody, we are restricting the amount of blood and therefore oxygen that's going up into the brain. And so if you are smothering somebody along with choking them, especially if you're going for a long thing where you're just holding them there for a long period of time, smothering them with your crotch, what's going to happen is that their blood oxygen levels are going to go down significantly. And so if you choke somebody out with that, well, now you've actually not only made them pass out from not having enough oxygen from blood flow, but now you also deoxygenated their blood on top of that. So the risk of cardiac arrest goes up significantly. The amount of time it's going to take that person to recover from passing out from that choke is going to go up significantly. So when we are playing, yes, the general answer is we do have to be more concerned with the more elements of deoxygenation and blood flow restriction that we're adding to the mix. So can somebody is the risk of, when you're adding smothering to a head scissor, is the level of risk going up? Yes, it is. But also keep in mind, if you were to put your hand over somebody's mouth and nose until somebody passed out, so you just right, we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that they cannot fight back and they're going to pass out. People can hold their breath for, I think the record is between 5 and 6 minutes now, and then they will pass out, right? If you are less well conditioned, then you could pass out faster, and in that period of time, just even without the choking involved at all, you could trigger a cardiac arrest, you could trigger respiratory arrest in that period of time. But so we are deoxygenating the blood, and then we are restricting blood flow on top of that. And what can end up happening is that you're just compounding all the elements that could lead to death. So I think that's kind of the long version of the answer, and I'm sorry if you were hoping for the short one, but it is kind of a complicated thing that there are inherent risks with that, and I don't mean to be fear-mongering here. I believe in what we refer to as RAC, which is risk-aware consensual kink. So if you are going to be doing this type of breath play, just know what the risks are. Honestly, I personally don't want to do this type of play with anybody who is not trained when in CPR first aid. I would feel much better playing in a space that had an automated defibrillator, because the fact of the matter is that you can be doing chest compressions to try to keep people alive until the EMTs arrive. But, as far as I know, chest compressions themselves alone will not save somebody from cardiac arrest. They can prolong how long they are alive before absolute brain damage happens, but you're not going to reset the heart in that amount of time just with chest compressions alone. It actually takes a defibrillator to shock the heart back into a normal rhythm, normal-ish rhythm, a life-sustaining rhythm, if cardiac arrest is triggered. So, are there ways that we can mitigate the risks of breath play and choking? Yes, we get trained in CPR. We have a defibrillator on hand. We are not afraid of fucking calling 911 when there's a problem. That's one of the biggest things that you have to be concerned about when it comes to trust and kink, is that, basically, if you're ever doing any kind of kink play, you really want to be playing with somebody who will call for an ambulance, even if that means that they're going to spend the next 5 years in jail, right? And I mean that seriously. If you are going to be choking somebody, if you're going to be doing head scissors, you need to come to terms with the absolute reality that if that person dies, you can totally be charged with manslaughter, right? You could be charged with murder. And so, even if it's consensual, you can't legally consent to somebody choking you. You can't. Can you say in a court of law, hey, yeah, we were consensually playing and this was an accident, you're still going to go to jail for a manslaughter charge. And so when we say, play with somebody that you trust, play with somebody that you trust to call the ambulance, even though they are likely going to have repercussions from doing this to you. Okay? So I think that's about what I have to say with it. Understand the risks on both parties, and decide for yourselves whether or not you want to be doing this kind of play. I do engage in this kind of play on both ends. I've choked people out hundreds and hundreds of times. I've never had an incident, and a lot of people never do. But it is 2021, and we do have this fucking virus that is increasing that risk for us. So try to be as safe as you possibly can. Understand what the risks are. Understand that the risks are very much so real. The odds are in your favor, but they are real. So, that's what I have to say on this subject. Again, I am not a medical professional. I do have some better understanding, as you probably can tell by now, but at the same time, it would be unethical for me to say, oh yeah, you're completely safe when you do this, because the truth of the matter is, you're not. Okay? So don't get carried away. Pay attention. Watch your partner. If somebody does pass out, let them go right away. They're not going to enjoy the scene anymore if you choke them out for longer, to make sure that the choke actually worked and they're not pretending. Don't fuck around with this shit, guys. If somebody passes out on you, let them go. Let them catch their breath. Don't try to choke them out the moment that they wake back up. Give it some time. Try to not to choke people out 3, 4, 5, 7, 20 times in a day. don't do that. Like the risk actually goes up exponentially the more you do it. So, and the older that you get. So that's what I have to say on the subject, guys. I hope this has been helpful. We'll see you on next time. Bye.